This is the Mechanical Care Forum, and it's season 14. The season we're capitalizing on the natural happenings of the day. We're talking shop on things related to mechanical assessment and patient treatment in the musculoskeletal therapy space with special guests on the ride home. Today we're joined by Dan Kelley, discussing his experience over 52 years of being a therapist and 41 years of owning a private practice. His early time learning MDT and observing Robin McKenzie treat patients. Some interesting patient experiences and more. All this on the ride home. Today on MCF. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast for season 14. There have been several occasions in my career where I've had the opportunity to spend time with some very talented clinicians. I'm referring to times where I've sat down with a colleague or at the end of the day after a patient encounter and discussed the situation. I've also had a chance to travel with some pretty amazing mechanically trained therapists on one of our humanitarian efforts and chat about a patient we saw that day. Or I've connected on the phone with a faculty member who has had a memorable patient response in their physical exam that day. Some of these moments have been where I've drawn a clinical pearl or two, which has in some small way added to what has and continues to make me into the clinician I am today. So this season, I'm catching my guests after they've had a typical day in the clinic or in their work, and we're using the natural course of the day to be the content we can draw from, to take something small away and use as further knowledge or inspiration or motivation, or to just put things back into perspective on the ride home. Don't worry, we'll keep our eyes on the road and our hands on the wheel and just have a discussion. So buckle up and tag along. This episode is brought to you by Atlas Health. Atlas Health is a web-based exercise and education delivery system tailor-made for those of us who use specific end-range repeated movements. In short, it's a better way to deliver exercise and education. How standardized and deliberate are you about how you take a history? How about your physical exam? Are you pretty methodical and intentional? Now, how standardized and methodical are you about sending your patients their home exercises and education? Do you get a little loose with that and perhaps as a result experience patients coming back misunderstanding what they were to do and what they were trying to accomplish with the exercise? Here's an invitation to do better by delivering meticulously crafted animations of your patient's exercise and education. Visit atlashealthx.com to see a demo. And just for MCF listeners, you can use the code ATLASMCF25 for an immediate access and free trial for 25 patients. Go to atlashealthx.com/MCF and get started today. This episode is also brought to you by Therafa. Therafa is a front-end patient intake digital platform to obtain a great portion of the medical history and pertinent symptom history from your patient. Think of it as a way to polish up your intake process with your patients. It's a technology to aid in a few things like musculoskeletal triaging, decision support, document automation, and care navigation, all at the point of care, and it does it from the patient's perspective, which is what you and I know is all too often not offered to the patient. This is to allow the patient to tell their story. In my opinion, after using Therafa for several months, it's ideal for the busy clinic where time is of the essence. Right now, Therafa is offering, and only for MCF listeners, 2 months, full access totally free. Just go to therafa.com/join/MCF. All right, let's get on with today's guest, Dan Kelley. He's a PT for 52 years, one of the first therapists to learn and then teach MDT, being trained by Robin McKenzie himself. A private practice owner for 41 years in the St. Louis, Missouri, USA area. Come along with us on the ride home. So here we are at the end of a work day, excited to have and bring to the podcast for the first time who I've been after for a long time, Mr. Dan Kelley. Dan, thanks for joining us and joining me on my ride home today.
Thank you very much for having me. Glad to meet up with you.
Absolutely. So, Dan, on your typical drive home or drive to work, what do you commonly do on the road while you're driving?
Well, I have about a 25-minute drive, and it's on part of it's on the interstate. So survival is the first thing that's on my mind. Okay.
Gotcha.
But usually I'm happy to get in my vehicle and start driving home and take it easy. And it's, usually it's a pretty hard day. I see a lot of patients still.
Yep.
I probably don't, I turn the ball game on, listen to my St. Louis Cardinals.
There you go. Okay.
If they're not playing, I'm going to listen to some music. All right.
Yeah.
So I don't think much about the day on the drive home. I think more about that right before I go to bed or something.
Oh, okay. So got a
Makes,
few.
yeah, I'll think it's second to last thing I think about before going to sleep. I think about how well things went that day,
Yeah.
not how bad things went.
Okay. Yeah. Intentionally. Yeah. Keep that
Yeah,
positive attitude.
right. You know,
Yeah.
that helps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, will you give people just a glimpse of, we could talk probably the whole time just on your career because it's been a lengthy one, right? But would you give people just a glimpse of where you are, Dan, what you've done along the way, what you're currently doing now?
Well, I've had this private practice and it's been a small practice since 1983. And I've been in the same office space since 1990. So been a long time. And I've been practicing this October totally as a clinician for 52 years.
Unbelievable.
That's that's a lot of patients.
That is a lot of patience. Have you estimated about how many you've seen?
Well, I probably have, I don't know, 300,000 visits. Who knows?
Wow,
Something like
amazing.
that. I've
Yeah.
always just been mainly a clinician,
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
and it's been great. I
Hmm.
can't think of anything else, you know. I had a couple of avenues where I almost went a different way. One time working in retail for Procter and Gamble. Can you
Really?
imagine
I can't.
putting cans of something on the end aisle in a grocery store? No, thanks. I'm glad I didn't make that choice.
So that was before you got into PT school, or that was after?
Well, I finished my degree in education and I
Okay.
was headed towards physical therapy school.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of in between. And I got interviewed by this guy who worked for the company and he offered me a job. I was kind of like broke,
Yeah.
just married.
Yeah.
I thought, well, maybe I should just get to work. No,
Mm.
I worked too hard to get into physical therapy school.
Yeah.
So I kept that route.
Aren't you glad you did?
Yeah, I am too. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, along the way, you were exposed to MDT quite early, long before most of us were even around. Will you talk about that first introduction, Dan? How'd you get introduced to Robin and the McKenzie method?
Well, the actually first time I ever heard of Robin was through Dr. James Syriacs because I was taking some training from him and I asked him, how do you treat the patient with the acute lateral shift and the back pain and sciatica and stuff? And he said there was this chap from New Zealand, McKenzie, that's got a method to do that. And that was right before he put that plate of illustration and instructions and how Robin corrected the lateral shift in his manual. And and then I got a hold of Robin's article he wrote in 72 about how to correct the shift. And then there was a course in California that Robin was going to teach for 4 days.
Yeah.
And I go, 4 days to learn how to do this manual shift correction. I was a little confused, but
Yeah.
I got, after a while, it didn't take long to realize that what his system was
Yep.
of assessment, the classifications, and the forced progressions of patient generated first and then therapist just made great sense to me. I already been trained by a lot of people, and it was all manual work first,
Hmm.
not the patient. Some patient stuff you had them exercise later, and you at that time didn't even know what direction to have them move to. So, and then Robin and I went to lunch the first day of that course, and we became friends, and we were friends ever since.
Wow. Yeah.
That was in about 1978. And then I was part of a group in that year-long orthopedic manual therapy program at Hayward.
Hmm.
Robin came and spent a couple of weeks with us every day in the clinic. So I learned a lot more from him.
Mm.
And then every time I would see him treat a patient, I just learned so much more. So I kind of followed him around when he was doing other courses when he came to the States. He
Yeah.
probably thought of me as, doesn't this guy learn this yet? He keeps showing up, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So, and then we started getting organized here in the United States, and then started the Institute. And I've been working with him on that for about 30 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
Did a
Dan,
lot of different things in the Institute.
yeah, yeah. Dan, you were impressed by Robin and how he corrected lateral shift and how he got patient generated forces. What about his those soft skills, communicating with patients or gaining a patient's trust?
Well,
Was there anything?
sure. Well, he was a clinical genius. In other words, he could figure a patient out and determine what the best thing was for him.
Mm-hmm.
His personality was pretty calm with people and
Yeah.
wasn't off. It was working with the patient. He said, we're going to work together to find the solution
Yeah.
instead of, I'm going to show you what you need to do. He said, we're going
Mm.
to find it together, because he would tell the patient that you have the answers. So, and however you answer my questions, you know.
So we hear that taught in courses how Robin always impressed that the patients will teach us the most, but he said that actually to the patients.
Yes,
Uh-huh. Do you use that same method at times?
I all the time. Every
Yeah.
time a patient comes in, I'm going to just tell them what the process is. And the
Yep.
process is, that you and I are going to find the solution to this.
Yeah.
So you can be doing things for yourself. And instead of you lying on the table and me do something, and you get up and feel a little better, and then you walk out. By the time you get your car, you're paying back. Where you're
Mhm.
going to have something to do that you can do consistently at home and so forth.
Yeah. Is that just so foreign to patients because in most other scenarios in MSK type of clinicians that they just are taught that we go in and that person tells us what we have wrong with us, tells us what we need to do?
I think isn't there some study that says that um, physicians within 30 seconds have decided what's wrong with you?
I think
You
that's
know,
something to that effect.
yeah, you can't do that,
Yeah.
And so what happens when I explain that to the patient about this is what we're going to do, and they say, "Oh, that sounds great." Well, right there, when they say that, they have bought into the system already.
Mm,
You know,
yeah.
if they give me some other kind of clue, like, "Oh, okay," then I might say I better do a little more selling here
I see.
to
Yeah.
explain to them.
Yeah. So just on the fly, you decide whether or not they're buying in or not.
Right. When you
Yeah.
ask a patient, will you be able to do this exercise? And I need you need to do it every 2 hours, and they go, well, I'll try. I'm going, okay.
And so,
I got to do a little more teaching here,
yeah. Okay.
giving them
Yeah.
reasons for what they need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So, talk a little bit about your time with the Institute, MIUSA. What role did you play with them, and how did you see the Institute grow over those early years?
Well, Robin's method probably really caught on in the United States a little quicker than any place else.
Hmm.
And he identified a few of us here in the States, people that he had met on courses and so forth, that could be potential people that could help him. And that
Hmm.
was myself and Kathy Hoyt and Barbara Stone, Greg Silva, Wayne Rath, Angelo DiMaggio. So we kind of all got organized, and we would, at different times, all of us would teach with Robin when he was here. And then he would kind of approve us as to be able to teach. And then we all kind of went off on our own and arranged our own courses, but we got organized kind of like an association. And Kathy Hoyt did a lot of advertising of courses for us and stuff. And then we really got organized and formed a for nonprofit corporation in the United States. And then started going further down the track. And then Robin at the time was going to other parts of the world and identifying some other people at the same time.
Yeah.
And then Robin was here with me in St. Louis one time, and we were sitting chatting, and I said, we need to get this more organized. We need to form some kind of an association or institute, or we need to have a place, a clinic where people can come and get properly trained. And we discussed those things. And out of that came what was called the Lodge, where a lot of our older faculty now all spent their early training times with Robin in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
And then Robin got really smart about it all and hired some professional help to get the international part of the Institute organized. So where different countries that we could work in, they would have a license to the intellectual property that Robin had.
I see.
And then we really I guess the other big important thing was development of the credentialing exam.
Yeah.
I led that along with the U.S. faculty, and we developed that. And then that was going to be required to go into the diploma program.
Okay.
It just helped identify a person. They passed that exam. They showed they had the competency in it. And that was really good for a lot of people to be able to have that achievement.
Yeah.
And then Kathy and I wrote the first diploma exam. And that's been altered and changed since for quite a while now. It's much improved. But
Yeah.
So my other involvement was just in the U.S. branch.
Yeah.
As a faculty member, and I trained faculty, and then I took over as international chairman of the board of trustees.
Mm-hmm.
And it just grew. It was pretty amazing.
Why do you?
What's amazing to me is like there's some people that have taken training, gone all the way through the diploma program, and they've never met Robin.
Yeah.
And Robin just picked some really good people, and there's kind of a trickle down. Other people trained other people, and it's been really kind of pretty amazing to see.
Yeah. Dan, why do you think it took off more in the States than other countries? Any ideas?
Well, I think the States was the first place that Robin got out of New Zealand and was able to kind of teach his material. The States was. Mm-hmm. And Canada was a little difficult because they just wanted to flex everybody up there. Yeah. And then, he brought in this different look of a lot of these people need to extend their backs,
mm-hmm.
So that wasn't as well accepted. And then I'm not sure it actually took off pretty good once he got some people involved in Europe, the Netherlands and England, and a few people came to New Zealand and studied, went through the diploma program at the Lodge, and then took it back to their country.
Yeah.
Just the right kind of people with the right purpose of getting that information out there.
Yeah. Did you see resistance to the method and to the principles that it's built on?
I don't think I really ever saw too much resistance. I mean, no one could really argue too much with the effect of the treatment.
Okay.
I mean, how can you argue with patient gets off the table and, well, I feel much better. My leg pain's gone. I can move and it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
So no one would really disagree with that.
Yeah.
Now they might disagree with the theoretical rationale of, like, what the derangement is or what dysfunction is and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
but how can you argue with,
Yeah.
I feel better,
Yeah.
you know?
Dan, what about the fact that here we are decades later, and the majority probably of physical therapists here in the US are not trained or maybe haven't even taken a course? What can we learn from that? What can we consider, if that is in fact true?
That's a really good question. It's probably something we've been um, trying to solve for a long period of time, as long as I was in, to get more people to attend or train more people.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are so many different, I guess, methods of taking care of somebody that are out there. So you have a pretty good competition for that. And it's hard to get it into the schools,
Yeah.
and then you want to if you get it into the schools, the training has to be correct, and it's got to be done correct by the right people,
Yeah.
by faculty people.
Yeah.
You can't have someone going to a course in part A and then going back and teaching students and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a real problem. I guess marketing is a big issue. We need to find a better way
Yep.
to get it to the market.
Yeah. 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 So, the idea with this season with podcasts is just that there's so often we have those little moments in the clinic where we see a patient or we have a scenario arise, and maybe someone's visiting your clinic, or you've got a new PT who started with you and they shadow you a bit. And then some really good conversation occurs following that. And so tell us a little bit about what you've seen lately, maybe even today. Any interesting patients that come to mind?
Well, I had a patient the other day, and this is why I keep doing this.
Okay.
Okay. This lady came in with lumbar pain and radicular symptoms all the way down to her foot and ankle. She had a history of spinal fusion from mid-cervical to her thoracic, and she had neck pain and headaches. When she left, she had no more leg pain, and she was able to take away her headache. So that's in one, this is the first visit, but probably more importantly, she left with some hope that she didn't have to live with this.
Yeah.
And then following up, she's done really well. She's had these issues for a long time.
Right.
She just has some intermittent back pain and her neck is a little stiff,
Yeah. Did
and
you?
I didn't, have to do anything manually to her. It was all just through the assessment and showing her repeated movements and the
Yeah.
the right direction, and
Yeah.
showing her how to control her symptoms in certain positions that she would be in that would come on.
Yeah. She had that fusion that was older, that was pre-existing in that mid cervical through the thoracic spine. She had headaches,
Yeah.
and she also had this sciatica.
Yes.
You had to assess both her lumbar spines separate from her cervical spine and give her
Yes.
strategies for both areas for those
Correct.
different symptoms. Yeah.
Yeah. The cervical was easy. That didn't take long. Lumbar was a little more challenging in understanding her situation when things were worse and better, and then going through the assessment. But the cervical spine was show me where her symptoms were and when they were worse. And so I said, do this. And how's that? She goes, well, that feels better.
There you go.
I
Yeah.
ever, I have a story about Robin with a patient,
Let's
if you
hear
want
it.
to hear that.
Yeah, please.
We were up in Wisconsin. I was with him. He was doing a course, and they brought this patient in who complained of headaches. And
Hmm.
she's had them for years. She had had neck surgery. She had had all kinds of treatment for her headache. She even had a craniotomy, this poor woman. And then Robin asked her, he said, is there any time in the day when you don't have your headache? Anytime, anything you do. She goes, well, if I lie down flat without the pillow, my headache goes away. So he said, do you have a headache now? She goes, yes. We'll do this, do the retraction. Her headache went away. She comes back in the next day, considerably decreased frequency of her headache, much better. Third day, she came back, no headache. I mean, that's pretty dramatic with a history like that.
Yeah.
Just asking her the right question.
Yeah. So he asked the question, do you ever not have the headache, for the purpose that if she said, oh, yes, there is this occasion. And then his question is, well, what are you doing when you don't have the headache, in order to find a hint toward what
Sure,
direction she needs to go?
absolutely.
Yeah. Do you find that that can turn off a clinician if they think, well, is it that really that simple? That seems a little too simplistic.
Well, patients tell me that all the time.
What do you say to them?
I said, yeah, it's that simple.
Yeah.
I said, you just have to, and I'll use the example of, stress on the finger.
Yeah.
This hurts. Now, how are you going to do to relieve it? You're going to go in this direction, or are you going to go in this direction?
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I tell people that's why I can do this job, because I'm not the smart enough guy, and this is a pretty simple method. So,
Yeah.
yeah. What other things did you learn from just being with Robin? Maybe even just traveling to and from these courses, or just observing him with students?
Well, clinically, I just learned so much, obviously, with him, how to assess a patient, and then, what did he do when he struggled with trying to figure out what's wrong with a patient. And typically, he always went back to the history. He
Mm,
would review the history, and then he would go back and clarify some things. And a lot of times he would find the solution there. So that's what I always do. If someone's got me confused, or what's going on here, this isn't responding like I thought it might,
yeah.
I go back to the history.
And are you looking to find that you missed a directional preference and you were going the wrong direction, or the amount of load? Or are you talking about even just like considering, am I even in the right location of where this is coming from, or the right classification?
It's all those. The first thing I do is, do I have the right classification?
Yeah.
Or maybe I don't have a classification.
Okay.
So, and then I'll review it might be the history. Am I doing, do I have them going in the right direction?
Mm-hmm.
Are we applying enough force or too much force?
Mm.
Or do we need to alter the direction and do something laterally or something?
Yeah.
Um, and then, are they doing the right things? How are they doing it? Are they controlling their posture? Or are they still doing the things that aggravate it all the time?
Uh-huh.
You know, but a lot of times I'll go back to that history, and there's something in that history that will give me the clue to the direction or the classification. Something like maybe like an example of that would be in the lumbar spine.
Mm-hmm.
Had a patient once, and I didn't ask the question about do they have pain on coughing or sneezing, and I go back and I didn't look at my assessment form, and I don't have an indication that I got an answer to that. And so then I asked them, when I cough, yes, I'll feel it in my back. Well, that to me means that just made me kind of move more into the classification of derangement.
Yeah.
And then if they cough, does that mean they need to extend or they need to flex? And then I just made a reassessment, and they needed to extend.
Mm-hmm.
And you go through when they're worse and when they're better.
Yeah.
There might be a clue there that just wasn't clarified.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get, as a clinician, you got patients waiting, and you go things through too fast or something. Are you worse or better when you're sitting? And they go, I'm worse. The next question should be, what's worse?
Mm.
If you're talking about somebody with back and leg pain, they'll say, oh, my back is worse. What about your leg? Oh, no, that feels better. That's a whole different direction,
Yeah.
So there might be little clues like that.
Yeah. Early on, you applied these principles to the spine patients. Did you apply them to extremities right off the
Early
bat?
on, did I apply them?
Right.
Oh, I jumped on repeated movements.
You did in the extremities
Yeah.
way back before they
Yeah.
had a Part E.
Oh, yeah. Way before that. I actually taught a shoulder course using mechanical diagnosis and therapy principles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I wouldn't go to it today.
okay.
It's much better today.
Yeah. What do
I
you
just
remember?
did that on my own.
Yeah. What do you remember about treating extremities early on?
Well, some of the things in the beginning, when I would perform repeated movements and stuff, things responded pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I always kind of consider that a derangement in the joint,
Mm-hmm.
especially the shoulder. But a lot of times it turned out to be more of a contractile dysfunction, which responds pretty rapidly to
Mm.
repeated movements.
Yeah.
So I didn't have quite the correct mechanical diagnosis at the time, but they got better anyway,
Yeah.
regardless.
Just moving folks, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we've got a paper now, multiple papers that talk about what might predict which direction that a person needs to go. Were you seeing that similar to an obstructed patient that needed lumbar extension, that you saw a loss of motion in the shoulder early on is that the direction you commonly went, or were there patterns that you just had picked up on and you kind of got in those habits of going after the more common reductive loads, or?
I'm not sure I can answer that too well because I didn't keep such copious notes on those different patients and so
I
forth.
see.
I just, I probably end up starting patients in repeated movements. I probably started with extension of
Yeah.
the shoulder first,
Yeah.
and then would progress through there.
Yeah.
If I didn't get the results or anything, then you start going other directions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes I had no idea why something worked and why something didn't.
Were you able to reach out to Robin in those instances and say, what's going on here? Where he could obviously communication wasn't as easy back, when you're first starting as it is nowadays. But did you guys have discussions as you
all
were?
the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Every time I would meet with him, I always had some clinical discussion. It wasn't all about Business Institute and stuff.
Yeah.
So, and
Okay.
I think one of the neatest discussions I had with Robin once, we were discussing centralization,
Okay.
and we always considered centralization as a phenomenon that occurred. It meant you were moving the patient in the right direction.
Yeah.
But we also made the comment about they actually get better. And then he realized, well, that's prognostic. So if you have somebody that centralizes, they're going to get better. So that was pretty important in understanding of how important centralization was.
Yeah.
And so we talked sometime about, can the same thing happen in the extremities? And he thought it could. And I start looking for that.
Yeah.
Like, you probably have seen that, where the patient has pain in their arm and shoulder and they do a movement. It becomes more localized,
Yeah.
the shoulder
Yeah.
or other joints. It can happen too.
Hmm. Yeah. Where did you see it change the most? The method change the most over decades?
The method change?
Yeah. Or did it not?
I don't think it's changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I don't. I can't see how the method has changed
Yeah.
unless I'm not up on something that someone has discovered or realized, you
Well,
know.
I know that when I first started taking courses in the early 2000s, we knew that there was derangement, dysfunction, postural, and then other.
Yes,
And there was quite a gap for me from when I went through and got credentialed, and then many, many years before I was able to find my life situation where I could go and do the diploma program. And when I went back and began that, I realized that other was a lazy term. If my instructors were saying, okay, what classifications are on the table with this patient, and I said, well, derangement and other, well, they would say, well, what within other?
yeah,
But maybe that's just me not remembering that we had within the system all of those subgroups within other defined as well back in the early 2000s. Or maybe I'm remembering correctly and we didn't have those. So, in that respect, they want us now to, of course, rattle off. Is this soft tissue trauma? Is it soft tissue disease? Is it inflammatory arthropathy? Is it chronic pain? Is it, and on and on and on with these subgroups within other?
oh, I see. Well, other category means everything else but posture derangement and
Dysfunction.
dysfunction,
Yeah.
and others could still be a mechanical problem
Yeah.
and still could benefit from your assessment and
Yeah.
from your treatment of treating them mechanically. Maybe there's other doesn't fit into those syndromes, but they still may respond to a particular exercise
Yeah.
or a particular mechanical kind of treatment,
Yeah.
a particular direction.
Yeah.
I mean, if there are other where they're not suited for mechanical therapy, then they need to go on. And I got a really good example of that I had recently, if you'd like to hear that.
Let's do.
I was treating this lady, and I've treated her before. I was treating her this time for her neck, and she was responding very well. But she came in complaining of one time for her neck, but she started telling me about her buttock, hip, and thigh pain. And I had treated her before for her back. So but when I did go ahead and assess it, and it wasn't really all that conclusive for her to be from her back, but the hip was okay, and anything in the thigh didn't seem anything problem there. Knee was all right. So I sent her away doing some, just as kind of a trial of doing some back movements. And she came back in and she wasn't any better. And actually, she had a bit of a limp that she didn't have the previous day.
Okay.
So I re-examined her hip, re-examined her back, looked at her pelvis, still couldn't find much. So I said, why don't you go back to your doctor? And I was suggesting that maybe she needed some imaging or something. So he thought it was her back, and he had an MRI of her spine, and that was inconclusive. And she came back after that, and she was limping more. And I reassessed her. And this is about, I guess, the third time I've seen her for this. And I said, this is not your hip. It's not your back. I said, your leg needs to get looked at, her thigh.
Yeah.
So the doc, instead of ordering just an x-ray or an MRI of her thigh, and it turned out she had a femur fracture from an osteoporotic condition.
Okay.
And she ended up having to have a rod put in her femur.
When you looked back at the history, what was there that supported that, okay, this doesn't look mechanical?
Well, there were things that she could do that would make it worse. And most of those were weight bearing.
Okay.
And the things that she, the things like sitting and getting up from sitting were a little bit. Probably the other biggest thing that I remember now was pain at night.
Okay. Yeah.
So I would, maybe I could have sent her off a little sooner.
Yeah.
But
she was of the age, she had some workup on bone density prior.
Yeah, she's got an issue already with that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But there was no incident that she pointed to exactly.
No incident at all.
So you don't necessarily have to have that incident report.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. She had nothing that, the symptoms started for no apparent reason. She just started having the symptoms.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's a case where, the proper assessment and so forth would lead you down the track to another diagnosis and get her off to where she needs to be taken care of.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great example. Speaking of cases, and pardon this quick interruption here, Dan, but within Case Conversations, which is a resource that we've gathered a number of clinicians who are veteran using these principles to offer and present interesting and challenging actual patient cases. We've had a number of pathologies and classifications and clinical scenarios that we highlight. We've recently highlighted several extremity patients, one of which was with Lindsay Carlton. She's a clinician up in New York who's also an athletic trainer. Lindsay walked us through an actual patient that she saw on the sideline during a football game, American football game, with a reductive load found kind of opposite of a throwing motion. And so that's just another way that we're here at the podcast, we're trying to help others who don't have good access with clinicians, get more exposure to people like yourself with like-minded clinicians on a regular basis. So anybody that's listening that wants to find out more about Case Conversations, you can check it out at mechanicalcareforum.com. Dan, before we started recording, you had mentioned that you've got a therapist that's working for you. You've had previous therapists that worked for you, even Chris Chase, who works with the clinical placement down in Austin, Texas. Talk with us a little bit about what you've seen benefit mentoring a younger clinician and bringing them along. And is it a little tough love here and there, or is it being patient with them, or is it identifying their strengths or pointing out their weaknesses and setting aside time to really, or is it all of that? How have you really focused on trying to bring your clinicians along in their development?
Well, usually if they haven't been exposed to Robin's work, then, I have them shadow me. When they first someone would first come, like Chris and Kevin, another therapist, came to work with me about the same time,
Okay.
and they were right out of school.
Yeah.
Okay. So I said when they weren't busy, they had to assist me. So they would observe and they would see what I was doing with patients and assessment. So
Hmm.
I always thought that was a good way for them to learn. They're not under any pressure. They just sitting there observing. I have them fill out, work on the form, fill it out as I'm going through a patient.
Yep.
Then, I get them off to the course, and I don't want them coming to my course if I was teaching. I want them to come to somebody else's.
I see.
So we go through all the courses, and then we would just spend time, you know, every once a week. We met for an hour, and we would spend time on patients that they were having trouble with. We would practice techniques. I would take time and observe them. And then again, they would observe me. So it was pretty much clinical and intense kind of thing, but not threatening at all.
Yeah.
All of it is about you're here to learn, you know?
Yeah.
And I've just been, and I said, I'm not any smarter than you. I've just seen 1,000 more patients than you have.
Hmm.
And so take that experience and, learn something from it.
So it's not threatening at all, but when you sat in on them treating patients, I have to believe they felt a bit intimidated.
Well, there's probably a little bit of stress
Yeah.
with that.
How did you handle that situation?
Well,
To try to,
we tell the patient as part of our quality assurance, we see patients together.
hmm,
And so, and then we would ask the patient if it's okay if two of us are in there. Most of the people say, oh, great, two of you, that's wonderful,
yeah,
for the price of one.
yeah,
So we did that.
yeah,
It's a little hard on scheduling and so forth. So we don't get to do it probably as much as we would like to.
yeah,
But sure, it's a little bit nerve wracking. But
yeah.
Brittany, who's with me now, she loves it.
Does she?
Yeah.
Did you see differences between Tom and Chris and now Brittany and Kevin about how you had to approach that or where you saw that they were struggling and how you had to try to work them through those challenges?
Well, I would do sometimes I would review their charts and their assessment
Mm.
with a red pen.
Mm.
What's this mean? What's this mean? So
Yeah.
their documentation on what was happening with the patient had to be pretty good.
Mm.
Although or they would show they were missing something.
Yep.
The other things, everybody's different, and everybody's got strengths and weaknesses. Before we developed the credentialing exam,
Yep.
we had to write the competencies. And so I wrote the competencies, all the tasks that it takes to do this method. And so when we wrote that, and that was a collaboration of effort with Kathy Hoyt and Betty Sindelar, who was
Yep.
a WashU professor
Yep.
and the faculty at that time. And then we had to weight those competencies in terms of importance. So having those competencies made it pretty easy to assess somebody and saying where they're weak and where they're strong in. So I was
Yeah.
able to say, again, a little more detailed questioning on what's worse and what's better with symptoms.
Hmm.
This is an example.
Yeah.
People were better at it than others.
Yep. We've talked about relationships with patients, and you building that trust. We talked about now, just for a moment, you working with these clinicians that are in your practice. What about relationships from a guy who's been in practice in the same building for 30 some years? You probably have been around longer than most of the people that might be referring to you.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Is that advantageous or does that create challenges? Do you have good relationships? Do you even worry about that? Or do patients just come and you don't have to really foster relationships?
I still, I'm in business, so you have to still kind of foster those relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been doing this for so long here, and I had a lot of my early referral sources when I first started my practice are retired. Okay. So um, what I've done is a lot of times it's groups. Say there's this group of internists, and I established a relationship with a couple of the docs there. And when they were, they would tell their new doctors coming on where to go for therapy. So
Mhm.
they would refer, and I've kept those docs, even though the ones that I initially started with are gone. I I see the younger ones have continued to refer to me.
Yeah.
A lot of it's when I started out, it wasn't like that. I had to go call on a lot of docs, a lot of referral sources, but
Yep.
I don't probably do that as much. We're doing more things to kind of um, market more to the public,
Yeah.
instead of to the referral sources. But we still do some things to make established relationships.
Yep. Have you switched to more to the public because you're seeing more patients come directly to you versus being referred from a doctor?
Well, we probably have quite a few of those. A lot of patients that will call their doctor and say, can I, will you send me an order to go to therapy with Dan or something like that?
Yep.
In Missouri, we just passed a law where we don't need that referral or don't need
Yep.
that order,
Yep.
but we have to let the doctor know we're treating them.
Yep. I see. What do you find that doctors want with that communication to let them know? Just, hey, we're treating this patient, or are you sending them your findings, or do you find that they care or they don't care? They read them, they don't read them?
Yes, yes, yes. All those. I mean,
A wide variety, huh?
some docs don't probably read them. I had one doctor tell me, he says, I know you got to send me all this stuff. He said, but I know if they're getting better or not.
Yeah.
So I said, that's fine. But he said, I know you got to send it to me. So send it
Yeah.
to me and I'll sign it.
Yeah.
You
Jump
know,
through the hoops. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
They well, it's just a mixed bag, I think. But I think
Yep.
most of the doctors want to know what's going on with their patient.
Yep.
And I think they do appreciate our note.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain things now, with Medicare requirements and what has to be in that documentation.
Yeah.
So we try to do our best with that.
Yeah. Dan, it's one thing to be a good clinician and to do your craft well, which I'm sure that you fit the bill there. But it's a different thing to run a business around that craft, right? Am
Yes,
I right?
yes, absolutely.
So, what do you think about whenever you think someone out there in the maybe listening and they're in a hospital system, they're in a chain as a staff therapist, and they think, man, I'd really like to make a lot more money, and so I'm going to go open my own clinic, or I'd like to not have to worry about all the headaches of working for the hospital system and filling out this or doing these in services at lunch. So therefore, I'm going to make it easier on myself and go into private practice.
Well, that won't make it easier on yourself, that's for sure.
Yeah,
That will not be easier.
right.
You'll find you'll probably work harder
Yeah,
and longer.
yeah,
And will you make a whole lot more money? You better look at that closely. What do you think you can do?
yeah.
But I'm in my own business because basically I'm probably make a bad employee,
You're too stubborn, huh?
something like that.
Yeah,
Well, a lot of, they got all these rules and regulations and so forth that I might not have to abide by working on my own.
Yeah.
but you still have to document, you still have to appease the referral sources.
Yeah.
You PT today, I think if I was starting out today in private practice, I would probably do more to market to the public
Yeah.
than I did in the beginning, but I would still go market myself to referral sources. I don't think a person wakes up in the morning and goes, "Oh, my back hurts. I got to find me a physical therapist."
Yeah.
I still think they think, maybe I should call my doctor or my chiropractor.
Yeah.
He said people don't think that ahead of time. So I still think referral sources is really a vital part of getting patients.
Have you found that you're better to try to build relationships with PCPs or internists, or better to go to neurosurgeons and orthopedists?
Well, I would say I would really go towards um, internists, rheumatologists, um, physiatrists, and then you try to in our area. There used to be a lot of orthopedic groups had their own physical therapist
Yeah.
until we outlawed that.
Oh, yeah. Missouri's got outlawed, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so now the orthopedists usually have a list of therapists that they can choose from. So they give a list to the patient and say, you can go to any one of these. We recommend these people.
Got it.
Um, Now, I mean, it's good to have a good relationship with an orthopedist if you can do that. But
Yeah.
just so they're hard to get to know and get into them. I mean, there's a process that you can do that, but it takes a long time for that
Yeah.
to happen.
Yeah. Yep. I'm sure your rent hasn't stayed the same in 30 years, or it's gone down, right? That's gone up. Uh, there's an expectation of clinicians when you hire a new PT, or the minimum wage might be a little different than it was 30 years ago. And yet,
Absolutely.
yeah, and
Yeah.
yet reimbursement hasn't taken those significant increases right alongside. How have you managed to hang in there?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's something that we're going through right now. We're going to transition to private pay,
Yeah.
except for Medicare.
Okay. And so how will you do that? Just take the lowest payers and wean those out and then work your way up?
No, I'm just going to get rid of them.
Just all in one fell swoop.
Well, fortunately, my practice is in an area where the people can probably afford to pay.
Yeah.
And so I already have an established pretty well a good clientele
Yeah.
where if I told them that I didn't take their insurance anymore, they'd still come.
Yeah.
I mean, some won't, but
Right.
hopefully we make up the difference with the higher payment.
Yeah.
So the reason I would stay with keeping Medicare, even though that's been decreased, is that we can't, according to the statutes, from I understand it, you can't take a cash payment from a Medicare patient.
Uh-huh.
So now you could be a non-participating provider for Medicare, and you can bill the patient for a limiting charge, and then the patient can get reimbursed by Medicare.
Hmm.
But gosh, people come in, they go to a medical clinic, they're used to giving them their card and they don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
taken care of, except maybe in their part of the year, they're going to get a bill from their practitioner for their deductible.
Right.
And so if you if you start doing that where they have to pay, that just confuses things.
Yeah.
And some people, they get the EOB back attached. There's a check attached and they don't realize it. So it gets quite confusing.
I see.
So I think we will probably just stay accepting Medicare. It's just easier to accept the assignment and work with people that way.
Got it. So doing that, going to more of a direct pay from the patient, obviously you can set your own rates, so you can then kind of figure out what do I need to have a bit
Right.
of a margin. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to figure out your cost per visit, and you want that plus a little extra so you can, you know, give raises or buy
Mhm.
something new piece of table or new equipment or something like that.
Yeah. 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 Let me just mention one more thing within our research resource here at the podcast, Inside the Science. That's that
Yes.
collection of study summaries and discussions on papers, like our recent paper that we talked about with tendinopathy with Peter Malieris, and a systematic review on classification systems with Sigmund Gismervik. So, for those clinicians out there who are having trouble keeping up with the literature, finding time, this is a way to do that. You can find out more about Inside the Science at mechanicalcareforum.com as
Mhm.
well. Yeah. Any other thing that you feel like in front of clinicians who are trying to do their best for their patients, who are using this mechanical assessment, listening clearly to the patient to identify what's going on? What's your word of advice for clinicians out there? What do you think are areas where people would be wise to, I guess, focus on or just remember?
Well, oh boy, how much time do we have?
As much as you want.
Um, I would say when it comes to assessing a patient, go back to what I said earlier. First of all, you have to explain to them what the goal is
Yeah.
and ask if they agree with that goal. In other words, the goal is we're going to find an exercise for you to do that will help you relieve your pain that you can do frequently through the day. It won't take much time. And we're going to find that together. And in that way, you have something that you can be treating yourself throughout the day.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? And I go, sounds great. It's exactly what I'm looking for. The other place I was they just put me on this machine and came back, put me on another machine and et cetera, so they
Yeah.
love it. People accept that.
Hmm.
So I think if you get them to buy in just to that thought is you get their cooperation.
Mm.
And then the history is so important. When you're talking to a patient and you're gathering information, you might have a thinking of what the diagnosis is.
Mm.
This is a lumbar problem and it's a derangement. And my third choice is dysfunction.
Hmm.
And my other choice is I don't know yet.
Hmm.
And then as you go through the questioning, the history, that list changes. I mean, the derangement comes up first, and then as you go through it. So at the end of your history and exam, you should have a pretty good idea what the mechanical diagnosis is,
Hmm.
or at least which is your first choice and maybe what alternative things it might be.
Hmm.
And then you put it all together with the physical exam.
Yeah.
And if it's really a mechanical problem and they're going to benefit by therapy, but you're struggling, just have faith in this method
Mm.
because it'll work. And if
Yeah.
you're just beginning to learn this, it might take you a few more visits
Yeah.
to figure it out than somebody that has more experience.
Yeah.
We used to teach the faculty to be careful about that when they're treating patients up on the stage. So you might have this person figured out, but the people in the audience don't. And so
Mm.
you can't take shortcuts or skip things and so forth. And that's
Hmm.
one thing you should not do when you're first beginning this method is don't take shortcuts.
Yeah.
you know, be methodical in your thinking and cover all the bases.
Yeah. Dan, you mentioned trusting the system, and I'm reminded I sent you my uncle who lives about 2 hours away. This was a number of years ago.
Uh,
And I knew that I'm from Southern Illinois, so not far from you. And he had a pretty good hot nerve down that arm from his neck. And you were pretty quick. I think first or maybe the second visit said you're going to need surgery. Does that come from just the method? Does it come from you seeing patients who previous were in similar situations and you saw those people where you maybe struggled with them and drug them through a few extra visits when maybe you should have seen that they needed to go into surgery? Or what do you think?
well, it's probably a combination, but if you have somebody that has an extremity pain and you can't, and you know it's coming from the spine, and you cannot, everything you do makes it worse, and they have other issues, tension signs or neurological deficits and so forth, you know something's not right there, and
Yeah.
therapy isn't going to help. Now, some people are right off the bat are that bad when they come in, and we know right away you really need to see somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it might take you a visit or two.
Yeah.
I think it comes from experience and seeing other patients, but the system, when you examine someone and have them go through movements, and that it is really beneficial to the clinician. I mean, it's a method of which you can sort out people who you can help and who you can't help.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Well put. Well, I've gone around this loop here driving for about an hour now, the same loop
Okay.
as you can see. So I'm running out of
I'm
gas.
beginning to see the same houses back there.
It's a pretty low budget special effects here, so you got to
I'm
work with
pretty
me.
impressed, though.
That's right.
Looks like you
What?
could do the movies.
Yeah, right. Dan, I really appreciate having the honor and privilege to chat with you. When I was on the diploma program, I mentioned to you before we recorded that I got to hear a lot of good stories from Chris
Yeah.
about his time with you, and he remembers those days fondly. You can tell it just as he talks about it. So,
I'm proud
that,
of him.
yeah, he's a good guy, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
he's a wonderful person and outstanding clinician and dedicated,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But on behalf of all of us who've learned from this system, you've been integral in its development, and people like you and Kathy and all those who've been in the institute for so long. We're indebted to you. So thanks for taking time out of your busy day and extending the day a little longer to chat with me for the podcast today.
It's been my pleasure, Jason. Thank you very much for asking me.
And there you go with episode 409 with Dan Kelley. Over 300,000 patients visits across more than 50 years of practice. Amazing. His appreciation of the principles he observed Robin use and teach in establishing and successfully owning a growing practice. Mentoring those younger clinicians and how he fosters their growth. And developing relationships in the greater healthcare community. What he has done and what effort he sees produces a better return than others. Thanks to Dan for sharing such a long and rich career and for teaching us so much about long suffering and steadfastness in private practice. Don't forget about our sponsors today, Atlas Health, a more precise and professional way to deliver exercise and education to the patients. If you use in-range repeated movements and sustained positions, and you teach patients to test and retest their motion, and you're still using pictures from Google, hand-drawn stick figures, or even your patient's phone, welcome to the 21st century. Get your first 25 patients free exclusively here at MCF. Go to atlashealthx.com/MCF. Click to sign up and enter your information in the code ATLASMCF25. and our other sponsor, Therafa, if you could use a better way to intake your patients. Gather the relevant information before the patient even arrives, making you more efficient. Check out Therafa and take advantage of his generous offer of 2 months free. You'll find that special deal at therafa.com/join/MCF. All right, thanks for coming along with us on our ride home today. Be sure to come back with us next week and hang out with our next guest on the ride home for more of sharing experience for improved patient care.